Okay, I think we should get started with this evening session. I am going to start with the land acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather and on which the Region of Peel operates is part of the treaty lands and the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. For thousands of years, Indigenous peoples have inhabited and cared for this land. In particular, we acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe-Chippewa peoples, and the land that is home to the Métis, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land, and by doing so, give our respect to its first inhabitants. We should continue as settlers living in this land with First Nations and Métis communities to continue stewardship over the land, the water, and the environment as a whole. I'm sure that the pandemic has really brought it home for many of us how important the land and the water is. We're missing our parks, and we're being asked to frequently wash our hands to maintain good hygiene. We should reflect on how fortunate we are that we have this water for our disposal. And we should also reflect on how this disposability comes with responsibility. Like the Mississaugas and the allied nations, who have been and still do take care of these waters, we too owe the same respect. We are sustained by clean water, and so let us sustain it as well. Additionally, we are joined by people today from across Canada and globally. We wish to acknowledge the global pan-Indigenous communities on whose territories our international attendees are. We hope our attendees take this opportunity to reflect on their own connection to their respective lands and the Indigenous communities with whom they share the land with. When we speak about Indigenous communities, one of the terms that usually comes up is how many inequities are present in not only our society, but also how inequities are present in society across the globe. Today, to talk about inequities in science, we have invited Sayema Chowdhury, and it is my pleasure to introduce her to you. Sayema is a lifelong educator and advocate, currently seconded to the Faculty of Education at York University, where she teaches a variety of subjects with a focus on diverse and equitable classrooms. She entered teaching, hoping to increase the possibility for students to see self-representation within the education system and to break stereotypes about South Asian women. She now focuses her energy on ensuring that all students, regardless of their background or identity, are represented and celebrated within the Ontario classrooms. She acts as a co-chair for York University's Faculty of Education Annual Equity Conference and participates widely in diversity and equity initiatives throughout Ontario and is committed to anti-oppressive education and learning. Prior to this role, Sayema was employed by the Peel District School Board, where she taught science, English, and special education, and was in the role of science department head for 7 years. Sayema delivers numerous workshops on a variety of equity topics, including culturally responsive pedagogy, Islamophobia, mental health and anti-oppression, queering pedagogy, anti-Black racism, building inclusive climates in class, and decolonizing classrooms. She also delivers workshops on leadership development and conflict resolution. Sayema is a certified MBTI practitioner with psychometrics, restorative practices trainer with the IIRP. Sayema, that is quite the introduction, and it is my honor that you are here today to speak to us about inequities in science. And I leave it up to you now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you for that lovely land acknowledgement. I did have a land acknowledgement here, and so I'm just going to skip through that. I think it's really important that we do take a moment when we do the land acknowledgement to really be present and really think about all the different connections. I think a lot of the time when we hear the land acknowledgement or receive the land acknowledgement, we tend to not be as mindful as we really should be, and which is the whole purpose of the land acknowledgement, to be present and to be mindful. So thank you so much for making it such a beautiful connection for us today. So I have limited time with all of you today, so I'm going to speedy through this, not speedy, but I'm going to go through this in the best way possible. So just for our goals for today is we're going to develop an understanding of the term equity. We're going to explore concepts of bias, stereotypes, and discrimination. We're going to raise our collective awareness around what dominant narratives are. This is like a newer to me in life term. It's something that I always knew, but I never had a term for it. And so now I'm excited to share this term with you. Explore how points 2 and 3 contribute towards inequities, and examine the South Asian female experience in STEM. And then we'll wrap up with some conclusions of what we can do moving forward. So first, I'd like to talk to you about the concept of inequities. I'm going to move us down over here. Oh, I just moved it a different way. Okay. Let's see if we can do this. Okay, it's fine. We'll do this. Essentially what you have here is a photo, and some of you may have seen this photo before. But if not, essentially what we see over here is on the left-hand side, we have an apple tree and people trying to pick the apple tree and from the apple tree. And what we have here is that people are at different heights, at different vantage points due to their height to reach that apple, which is their goal. Their goal is to reach that apple. And what they're doing, what somebody has done is they've provided them with the same size box for all of them to stand on in order for them to reach the apple. So this is what we would call equality or equal treatment of people. Because what we're seeing is, oh, okay, I can see that you have different height variations. You need a little bit of a boost in order for you to grab that apple. We're going to give you all the same thing in order for you to reach that apple. Obviously, this is problematic because people start at different starting points. And so we know that while this delivery of the box to the person on the furthest far left is great, it actually doesn't help the person on the right-hand side who had a different starting point to begin with in their journey of grabbing this apple. So that's equality, when everything's equal. And a lot of the time we'll hear this in the classroom as teachers. We'll hear people saying, Ms., that's not fair. Such and such got blah, blah, blah. And it's like, but you don't know such and such a story, right? So it's really important that we are cognizant that all of us have different stories and we're all starting from different places. On the right-hand side, what you'll see is that's a depiction of equity, which is what we're talking about today. We're talking about giving people what they need in order for them to be successful. So the concept of equity is predicated on the idea that not all of us have the same life journeys. We're not all born to the same homes. We're not born to the same communities. We're not born with the same kind of shelter to protect us from whatever is out there. We're not born with the same kind of food and nutrition that we're receiving on a regular basis. So we're not born with the same kinds of support networks. So these are an acknowledgement that depending on the different circumstances you have been born in and you live your life in, you have a different starting point. So you might be that person who only needs the one box. You may be a person who needs no box at all. But what about our students and our children and our families and our friends and our colleagues that we work with who need a few more of those boxes? So we deliver what people need in order for them to handle a system that is inequitable to begin with. So essentially, let's just say this was education. This apple tree was education. Right now they're picking apples. So you might think, oh, what's the big deal? They're picking an apple. So somebody can't reach an apple, not a big deal, right? But let's just say, imagine we're going to use a metaphor that the apple tree is like education and learning. And so imagine that everybody's trying to reach that apple tree. We have a responsibility as teachers. I have a responsibility as a teacher to see what is the starting point of all my students when they're coming into my classroom. What background knowledge have they come with? Maybe somebody's hungry. Maybe somebody didn't have breakfast and they're not thinking. Maybe somebody's working a second job because they're trying to help support their family. So what supports can I provide to my students so that all of them can reach that apple tree? And supports will look different for each child. That's how because the education system is inequitable to begin with. It's an apple tree that's been set up for a certain height of person, for a certain strength of person, Let's just say we had somebody here who was in a wheelchair. How are they going to reach that apple tree? Right? So the systems, all the systems around us are already designed with inequities that are built into them. So when we talk about equity, we're talking about acknowledging that the systems that are around us, including science and science education, education in general, jobs, law enforcement, everything around us has these inequitable systems to begin with. And it's our role as people who are in the system to try to acknowledge these inequities and provide to each person what they need in order for them to be individually successful. So I'm going to start with this little activity. We would normally play it and go into breakout rooms. We're not going to have a lot of time, so I'm just going to ask you to do individual reflection today. So my apologies for that. But there's a YouTube link that I'll provide to you. So if you want to play this with your friends and your family, you're more than welcome to afterwards. And this activity was taken from the Educators Equity Workbook by the Harmony Movement. So I just wanted to give them a shout out and an acknowledgement. I put the little book in the top right-hand corner there so that you can see it, because this is certainly not my idea. I wish it was. So we're going to pretend like we're taking a trip. Okay, so let's just say you boarded this trip. You're going to go halfway across the world. Okay, I'm just going to imagine I'm going to Bangladesh because that's where I originate from. That's like a 26-hour flight, people, so you can all feel bad for me. So, you know, you're going to be cramped in together like little, this is pre-COVID we're talking, right? So we're all going to be cramped in together. And let's just say you don't have to pay for a premium seat, right? So they can come to you and be like, you can pay double the airplane price and sit in first class. And I'm going to be like, I don't have that. That's really an inequity in itself, because that's a lot of money for a single person to go halfway across the world. It's already expensive to begin with, and that's even more. But I'm going to give you a special deal over here. It's going to be free. You can all choose your own seats based on who it is that you sit beside, okay? And there's no extra cost involved. So I'm going to remove that cost barrier for you. So we're going to take a trip, and it's a super long trip. And I want you to just think about who you would want to sit beside. So here's your first option. You get to choose an ex-high security prisoner who's been jailed for over 2 decades. Okay, so this is somebody that you could sit beside. Option 2 is a refugee. Option 3 is a person with a bald head with multiple piercings. Maybe if I go into this other view now, it'll be better. Oh, look, I can just minimize it. There you go. You learn something new every day. Option 4 is a woman from Iran. Option 5 is a basketball player. Okay, so these are your different options. And you can choose whoever you want to sit beside. And the thing with this game is, while you're thinking about who it is that you want to sit beside, what I really want you to concentrate on is, why might you want to sit beside somebody? And why may you not want to sit beside somebody? What are the different images that are coming to your mind about the different people that you see on the screen? What are the different things that you're assuming about where they've come from, what their life experiences are like, what their skin tone is like, what they might eat at home? What are all of these different images that are coming to you?
Sayema, would you like people to write in the chat group?
Oh, sure, they totally can. That's a great idea.
So feel free to tell us 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 who you would like to sit beside, and give us a quick reason. So you're getting a lot of 2s, 4s, a couple of 5s, maybe a 3.
2, 4s, and 5s. Interesting. Okay.
We have 5, a basketball player interested in sports and will learn more about fitness. Someone gave a reason for sitting about besides 2. A few people have said 2, saying that they would love to hear the life journey. Same thing for number 4, that they would like to hear the life journeys. Yeah, that seems like the consensus.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so now here's what I want you to think about. Now I want you to think about who you would least like to sit beside. If you're brave, you can share that as well. There's no judgment over here. It's just an exercise. But a lot of the time I know people are a little bit hesitant because they don't want to speak negatively about anybody. But if you feel comfortable, you're more than welcome to share, or you can just think about it. I'll give you about a minute or two to do so.
So we're getting a couple of number ones. Someone said they would prefer to sit beside all of them or any of them, and someone said they wouldn't want to sit beside any of them. Someone said number 5 because they like their space. When we're thinking about a cramped airplane. 1 and 3 are also coming up. Many people are saying that they're okay with sitting beside any of them. So there's a mix.
There's a mix. Okay, great. Great. And that mix also depends on your personal life experiences and what your kind of lived experiences have been to inform what you might be thinking about these different individuals and what they look like. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually show you who these different people are. Okay, we did this part already. I think it's playing.
I think the volume is very low, but it is playing.
Oh, yeah. I think there's no volume on this one. It's actually just,
okay.
It just takes you through the activity. So this is what I wanted to share with the viewers is that it's actually, somebody's made a YouTube, the department that I used to work for. Oh, here we go. Oh, sorry. My apologies. I might have to take us out of this presenter view. So just bear with me. So now we're going to reveal who each person is. So this is person number 1. So this is Kendra Ohama, who is the basketball player. So she is a wheelchair basketball player and a Paralympic medalist. And she's won gold for Canada at the Paralympic Games in 1992, 1996, and the year 2000. She also captured a bronze medal in the 2004 Paralympic Games in Athens and is a 4-time worldwide champion. Okay, so just think about that when we talked about the concept of needing space on the ride. How does that reconcile with who Kendra Ohama actually is? Okay, so who's our next person? So this is person number 2. This is Michaëlle Jean. She and her family fled the dictatorial regime in Haiti in 1968. She's a journalist and a stateswoman, and she was the first African Canadian, the 3rd woman, and the 2nd immigrant to serve as Governor General to Canada. Michaëlle is fluent in 5 languages, and she came here as a refugee. So this is a little girl. They have removed the actual post. I think that's just Justin Bieber. That's not the photo that I chose for that video. But essentially, it was Ines El Atrash, and she was a young girl who had lost her hair due to chemotherapy, and she had 2 sets of earrings, and so that's the multiple piercings that this is referring to, with the bald head and multiple piercings. Okay, our ex-high security prisoner is Nelson Mandela, who's leading a fight to end apartheid, which is a racist system that was present in South Africa for many, many years. Mandela was released from prison after 26 years and became the first president of South Africa to be elected in a fully representative democratic election. So he was a freedom fighter, and he's also a Nobel Prize winner. And lastly, our woman from Iran. This is Anusha Ansari. She's an Iranian American who paid a reported $20 million to become the world's first female space tourist. She was also the first female Muslim and first Iranian in space. She holds a master's degree in engineering and was a co-founder of 2 successful technology companies. She and her business partners recently sold one of these companies for $750 million. Very successful STEM woman there. And I believe that's all of them. We did all 5, right? Yes, we did all 5. So as we move through this kind of activity, the purpose of this activity is really just for us to think about, were you surprised by the revelation of who the people were based off of the description and then learning who they were? Were your assumptions correct about the individuals when you heard about them? And then how did you arrive at these assumptions? What is the impact when we let our biases, our personal biases and assumptions kind of guide how we view people that are in the world around us? What kind of impact might that have? So really what we're talking over here, the activity kind of reveals that a lot of the time, we always kind of think of ourselves as good people, and we're like, we don't base our thought processes on biases or on stereotypes, but we actually do. The majority of us do, actually all of us do. And they've actually done research to show that people who think that they don't have biases actually have some of the most biases. So we really need to think about and be critically aware of the systems that are around us that allow us to develop these stereotypes. So a stereotype is an idea or a belief that assumes the sameness of all members of a particular group, and they fail to recognize individual differences and attributes of the same characteristics to the members of the group. So let's just say, for example, somebody were to hear, I'm a teacher. They might make certain assumptions like, oh yeah, you probably love failing your, these are like, I hope these are not stereotypes you have, let's just say they were. You probably like failing your students, you love seeing your students suffer, or, oh, I guess you didn't want to do anything else with your life, and so you ended up being a teacher. Is that what ended up happening? Like a lot of the time, my students would say to me, Miss, you're so smart. How come you didn't become a doctor? So I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, are you trying to say that all your teachers are not smart? And they're like, no, Miss, that's not what we're saying. We're just saying, you could have been a doctor. And I'm like, yeah, so I could have been maybe, but I chose to become a teacher. So what kind of stereotypes were operating in their minds that if you're smart, you will become a doctor? It's like, direct connection, smart doctor. I would always ask my students, so what does that mean exactly? So does that mean you don't feel like your teachers who are tasked with being the people who are, trying to make you successful, you don't think that they're smart? Like, where does that come from? Where does that stereotype come from? Prejudice. So prejudice means that when we make prejudgments based on stereotypes that we have about people. So again, the assumption that people are all a certain way when they belong to a certain group. So, oh, you're South Asian. Oh yeah, you must love to eat roti, right? Like, or you must love to eat rice. When people say to me, when I say to them, I don't eat roti, they're like, what? What do you mean you don't eat roti? And I'm like, no, we're from Bangladesh, man. We eat rice. So I mean, and that's a stereotype in itself. But I'm just saying, like, it's just interesting. Like, we have these prejudgments that are put on us without people actually getting to see us as individuals and the individual things that we offer. Some really great examples of prejudice are people who have kind of European accents when they speak English. People make an assumption when they hear that kind of lilt to their voice, like a Britishy lilt, that they're very smart. People will say things like, oh, that person sounds so smart, or they sound so attractive because of their accent. And then when I ask people, okay, what if somebody had a South Asian accent? Would you feel the same way? Then they're kind of like, no, not really. So it's like, why? Why is it that when somebody has a European accent to their English, they're seen as attractive and they're seen as smart? Whereas when a lot of the time when we hear South Asian accents, even as South Asian people, we do this as well. We have our own prejudices against that person and might think, oh, that person doesn't speak English like I do. So I don't know. I don't know how educated they are or how intelligent they are, or I don't know what they have to offer to this kind of conversation. So these are prejudices that are placed onto people, as opposed to seeing them as individuals and recognizing that everybody has individual contributions. We kind of just lump people in based on those stereotypes. And then unfortunately, we allow judgments to be placed on them before we actually get to learn who these people are as individuals. And then prejudice plus power, when you're in a position of power, it leads to discrimination. So discrimination this is where it becomes extremely harmful. All of it is harmful, but this is where it really becomes harmful, because now you actually have the ability to act on this bias that you have, on this stereotype, on this prejudgment that you have. And they've actually done lots of studies where they've looked at people who are interviewing on panels. And Tina Lopez, she's an equity trainer within Toronto, and she did a really amazing study where she sat on a panel of lawyers, and these lawyers were predominantly white males, and they were interviewing, they were trying to diversify their law firm by bringing in racialized women, so Black and brown women. And what she did was she sat with them, they worked ahead of time, and they decided what are the look-fors that we're gonna tick off to say, yes, this is a person that we want. These are the criteria that we want. And she sat with them, and she sat through the interviews, and everybody did their ticking. And then afterwards, they kind of synced their notes together. And what they found was that a lot of the time when the candidate was white, they would say things like, oh, this person, they would have certain criteria ticked off. And Tina would say, well, hold on a second, that person never said these things. And they would say things like, oh yeah, but they didn't say it directly, but they were going to say it. Like we knew that they had it. We knew that they were going to get there. Whereas when it came to the women who were Black and who were brown, even though those women had said certain things, it was not checked on the criteria of the people that were interviewing. So when Tina said, yes, that person said those things, why did you not tick it? They were really baffled. They were like, oh, she said those things? I didn't even notice that she said those things. So this is where discrimination comes into play. It can be so powerful that it actually doesn't let you see what's the fact that's in front of you. Your brain doesn't even register certain things when you have such deep-seated stereotypes and prejudices that are operating within the way that you feel and you think. And so what ends up happening is that we are left with situations where we have things that we would call dominant narratives. So there's a video over here. It's a voiceover. It's literally just me explaining what this slide is. And that's because if this was going to be sent to you, I wanted you to have the description available to you, but for some reason it's blanking out on my screen. So I'm just going to give it to you this way. And my apologies that it's a smaller screen. So essentially it leads to dominant narratives. And so what are dominant narratives? So dominant narratives are narratives and stories, and stereotypes that we have been fed from literally the moment we've come out of the womb, right? So one of the first questions that people ask is, oh, is it a boy or is it a girl? Oh, and then you get a little pink cap if you're, a girl, if you're born with a vagina, and, if you're born with a penis, they give you a little blue cap, right? So these are kind of like, we're just like, dominant culture says that this is what you're supposed to do. I find it actually really harmful for those of you in the future who are planning to have children or adopting children or whatever it is that you want to do, or a niece or if you have nieces or nephews, even the toys nowadays, if you look at little toys that are designed for gendered female children, they're all in like variations of pink and purple. And it's like, you're actually stopping the development of a child, because children are supposed to be exposed to as many colors as possible because it acts as a stimulus to their development. So only exposing them to this limited color palette is actually hampering that child. So the media will perpetuate different things in terms of like they'll make caricatures of different people, the different toys that you choose to buy when you go to the store, that has an impact. Social media certainly has a huge impact. Our communities have a huge impact. So our different communities will say certain things to us from a young age about all of the different aspects of different identities. And so we hear this information, and we don't even realize that this information is coming to us, and we're socializing this whole bubble of like this fog of information that keeps coming to us and reinforcing stereotypes and prejudices about certain identities. And what happens with the dominant narrative is that it's left unquestioned, to the point that we don't even question critically, because we assume that the information that's coming to us is neutral. We assume that everything's okay with the information and this is just a fact. And so we don't even critically question the system that it is, right? So for example, right now, schools, we get like our statutory holidays are, we're closed for Christmas and we're closed during Easter times. And it's like, okay, that's great, and we just take it like that's how it is. And people will say, well, this is Canada and that's how it is. And it's like, yeah, but who decided that? And then, I've had some back and forths. I'm in the work of equity. Sometimes it gets heated. And some people will say to me, yeah, but this is the country. This is how it was built. And these are the people of the country who built the country. And I'm like, yeah, but we were here too. It's just that nobody paid attention to us. Like nobody paid attention to a voice that wasn't a dominant voice. And so we just leave these systems unchecked, and none of us really question, why is the system the way that it is? Another really great example that I want to share with you is this one over here. Dominant narratives of the US versus Canada. Like a lot of the time with Canada, we like to make ourselves like, oh, we don't have racism in Canada because we didn't have slavery. It's like, okay, actually, yeah, we did have slavery. We had years and years of slavery. And so did the US. And then people will say, but we had the Underground Railroad and we helped people escape from slavery into Canada. We were a safe haven, which I think is really interesting because I challenge back. I'm like, actually, the research shows that the Underground Railroad was a two-way railroad. If you were enslaved in the US, you would use the railroad to escape to Canada because you're trying to escape the masters that have taken you in, that have and forced you into slavery. But if you were in Canada, you would use that exact same pathway to get to the other side, to the US, because you're trying to escape from your masters here on this side. And so, this is a history that's often left unchallenged because it serves Canada, the dominant groups in Canada, our political organization, our politicians recently just came out and said, oh, we don't have racism in Canada. We don't have issues with that in Canada. And they're justified because they let this dominant narrative that we've been told from such a young age, we just leave it unexamined. And we assume that it's a fact, but it's not a fact. It's just that for every dominant narrative that we are fed, there are counter narratives and voices that are silenced. And we don't hear from those silenced voices. And there's a lot of work that's involved in silencing those voices, because once you have that representation and you have that voice and you empower that voice, dominant voices become very uncomfortable because it takes away some of their power. So anytime you're looking at systems, you should always ask yourself, is this a dominant narrative? Is there another story to this? Who benefits from this story that I'm taking for granted and assuming is just neutral? Because it's not neutral. No information is neutral. We always must question it. So that brings us to the topic that we're discussing today, which is what dominant narratives are told about science and who can do science. So I have a little bit of an interactive component over here. I'm just going to ask you to go to menti.com if you have a device that's available to you. And once you get there, you're going to put in the code 978380. And that will allow you to comment on this question. What dominant narratives are told about science and who does science? The code is here again. And the website is menti.com. Yeah, I'm loving it. Nerdy, men, big hair, reclusive, geeky, white people. Yep. Look at men. So the way that word clouds work is the word that's put in the most comes up largest. So you can see that, yeah, it's dominated by men. You're nerdy, you must be smart. It's a realm for people who are gendered male. It's the right way of thinking.
I love that the word weird is coming up.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah, scientists can be weird, some of us, but all of us can be, different stripes, different folks. The crazy hair, I love it. Yeah, that's the depiction that we show. Women are less than. It's the right way of knowing. It's the only way of being. Predominantly European, absolutely. And it's white. Yeah, exactly. So you've hit the nail on the head right there. A lot of the time in schooling, we're very guilty of this, the way that we perpetuate science and we show scientists in our textbooks and the different ways that we show people doing amazing work that are contributing to science is we always show old white men. That's literally, and then here's Jane Goodall. She's in there. By the way, I just got this photo by typing famous scientists. And this is kind of what came up. So you're absolutely correct. When we talk about dominant stereotypes, the dominant narratives that are in science, they're often that scientists are male, they are white. Your whole life has to be very dedicated to this. You can't have a life outside. You have to be like Jane Goodall and like leave everything and live in the forest for your entire life and study, the chimpanzees, I believe is what she was working with. You have to be very studious. You have to work very hard. And if you're very smart, as my students told me, then you'll make it in science. And very rigid, like you can't have a personality. You have to be very nerdy and you can't have any kind of activities or ambitions, or you can't enjoy listening to music or anything like that. You have to have a very rigid lifestyle. And you really have no personality. You're very awkward. You're very, you have a very strange kind of demeanor to you. You can't socialize with regular people. So these are all the dominant narratives, and there's more that are associated with scientists. And so it's important that we're aware that this is what's perpetuated to us, because if we're aware that this is a dominant narrative, remember that there's all these counter narratives that are also present and prevalent within science that are not being highlighted. And so the impact that this ends up having is that if you feel like, well, I enjoy science and I enjoy exploration, but I'm not nerdy. I like other things too. You're actually maybe excluding yourself from a passion that could be combined with a bunch of your other passions, and that could lead you to a whole pathway of exploration. But oftentimes we don't see ourselves reflected in that way. And so we don't think that this is something that we can achieve. It's not an area that we can belong to. Right. This is why I came into teaching, because I remember I had this moment when I was doing my research when my undergrad. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, I don't know that I'm enjoying this as much as I thought I would. And you know what? Like, gosh, when I look back at my schooling, I never saw anybody that looked like me. And then I thought, I love science, but I love working with people. And I love talking about broader societal issues. And I wish there was a way that I could combine all these things together. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I could do this through teaching. And so that's how I ended up becoming a teacher. So it's really important that we seek counter narratives. So there's great books that are out there, like this one, Women in Science. There's 50 Little Scientists. There's a lot of stuff that's out there. There's some great poster series that you can find that depict diverse women in science. So I try to bring these counter narratives into my classrooms. And there's a great series on, it's called Crash Course. This is for an older audience. So if you're a high school student, this would be appropriate for you. It might be a little, anybody can watch it, but the language might be a little bit more difficult to grapple with if you're a little bit younger, but certainly you can watch it and take from it what you want. It's called The History of Science. It's a crash course series. So it's on YouTube, and you can look at all the different ancient civilizations that have really pioneered, for lack of a better word, it's kind of ironic, and I say my next part, but really the ones who came up with these amazing investigative science concepts and techniques. And they were colonized, their knowledge was colonized by Europeans and repackaged, and then the face was stuck on it. So it's kind of like, imagine I go and I learn things from ancient China, and I don't want to give them benefit from it. But as the white male European who's colonized that space, I'm going to colonize your knowledge as well. I'm going to take your ideas, I'm going to write it up in a fancy paper because that's the way that we legitimize knowledge in our European way of thinking and our colonial way of thinking in science. And then I'm going to get credit for that knowledge and I'm going to claim it as my own. And my face is the one that's going to be perpetuated. So we don't acknowledge all the ancient civilizations and the current civilizations that are diverse, that are doing this amazing science work. And that also leads to the concept, the idea that science is not meant for some of us. I just want to show this video to you. We're not going to watch the whole thing, just a tiny bit. And again, it's on YouTube.
I walk into this community room about to deliver a workshop for a group of youth in a Scarborough community. I walk in there confidently because I'm all excited, I'm happy. And before I can even really properly introduce myself, a girl that looks like she could have been my sister looks at me and says, "Wait a minute, who are you? Where are you from? What do you do? Are you a social worker?" In my mind, I was like, rude. I was about to get there, but actually, I'm a scientist. And I'm gonna show you guys some different experiments and work with the team here to get you guys engaged. Nobody looked that excited. And this girl looks back at me and says, "No, you're not." I was like, "Oh, okay. Actually, I am. And why would you even say that?" Really serious. She's like, "Well, honestly, I don't know. You just don't look like you'd be a scientist." It was a little embarrassing because all the other kids were kind of like, "Yeah, sure, I don't know, like, maybe they got the wrong person." But beyond just being embarrassed, it dawned on me that that was the very reason that I was in that room. And that I understood why that girl didn't even think that I was a scientist when I said I was. So my name is Eugenia Duodu. Dr. Eugenia Duodu. And yeah, put some respect. Yeah. Thank you. And I just want to share a little bit of my story today as to how I became a scientist and what events occurred to allow me to be in that community room speaking to that girl.
So we're unfortunately not going to listen to her story, but again, it's on YouTube. The only reason I wanted to show it to you is to really depict how many of you might be in situations where you feel this way, where you don't often see yourself or think of yourself, or you have different aspects to yourself, and because it doesn't match with that stereotypical view that's being presented, and so you feel like that space isn't available to you. And I'll tell you that all of us are guilty of this. I started by saying that even those of us who don't think we operate on stereotypes, we operate on stereotypes. My mom is a research coordinator. She's a research coordinator for University Health Network. She's currently with Toronto General. She's worked with Cancer Care Ontario, as well as St. Mike's. And I know she's a research coordinator. People ask, "What does your mom do?" And I say, she's a research coordinator. She's got 2 master's degrees, and she coordinates research. And I know that she's working on, she's currently working on the largest lung transplant research study that's being done in North America. Although she's on a temporary pause because now she's researching COVID because all the regular studies have gone on pause for a bit. But anyway, point is that one day I had to search her for something. I can't remember why. I did a Google search on my mom, which I'd never done before. And there were tons of research publications that came up in different journals with my mom's name on them. And I just thought to myself, I don't know why I never made the connection that if my mom is doing research, she's got all this published work under her belt, right? And because to me, she's my mom and she's not nerdy, and she cooks and she's an amazing cook, and she takes care of us, and you know, she likes Bollywood movies, and she cries at romantic cheesy things. And you know, in my mind, I'm like, it never occurred to me that there's this other aspect to my own mom, where she's got all this amazing publication work that she's doing, and she's a somebody. My mom is a somebody. So you know, it's like we put these people into boxes, and we don't realize we're not seeing the whole picture of these individuals, because again, we're just fed like kind of like these kinds of photos. So the interesting thing about science is that we come to all these different stereotypes based on these different aspects of our personal identities and how we're fed these different messages and different beliefs. And when you are somebody who identifies as female, oftentimes we sometimes inadvertently get messaging that is different from messaging that people who identify as male will get. So if you think to yourself, who is more likely to be told, you should get off that video game and go explore outside, or who's told get off that video game and go help your mother, or go clean the house, like, which gender might be told which kind of comment. A lot of the time we're told things like males are encouraged to be rambunctious and to explore, and they're validated and they're praised for that sense of adventure that they have. Whereas for many people who are gendered female, the messages that we often tend to get are study hard, work hard. And we're, even when we're introduced to other people, people will say, oh, this is Sayema. Oh, she's an A+ student. She works very hard. These are things that we're rewarded for and we're validated for. And so we feel that we have to, this is the way that we need to operate. Compliance is often really valued in many people who are gendered female. Like if you are, demure and more quiet and you follow everything that you're supposed to do in the right way, these are things that we're rewarded for. And the really sad thing about that is that often it takes away from that sense of adventure that really leads to amazing scientific discoveries. And this is where I have the term here, catch-22. It's a catch-22 because we do have a system that is set up where we are told that you need to work hard and study hard and you need to answer all the questions and you need to respond to the teacher the way that the teacher wants to respond to you, because we're the gatekeepers as teachers to science education a lot of the time. And we ourselves reinforce this rigid way of doing science. And we're not often rewarding that creativity that comes into the scientific process, or that sense of exploration, because we're worried about liabilities and chemicals and so on and so forth that comes with the scientific process. But if you think about it,
Sorry, I just wanted to ask, what's your mom's name?
Oh, are you going to Google her?
Yeah.
That's hilarious. I will tell you after this, okay? Just give me a second to finish the thought. So essentially, it's a catch-22 because any scientist who actually has discovered something, who's actually made an impact on the world, is somebody who does think outside of the box. It's somebody who does take risks. It's somebody who does do something creative that hasn't been thought of before. It's not this like do as I say and say as I do, and then memorize everything and be very rigid, and then you'll get your A's and then you'll discover something. That's actually not the way that it works. Because if that were the case, all of us would have the solution to COVID right now. All of us would have the answer because we're all thinking the same way, right? It takes somebody to think of something different, to be different, to bring their lived experiences, to have that sense of exploration in order for science to happen, right? So it is a bit of a catch-22. I'll just very quickly share with you a little bit of my journey. I did achieve high grades in high school, and I credit that to my high school teachers because I was very creative in the way that I thought about things, and I was rewarded for that. And then when I entered into university, I found that for the first 3 years of my university life, everything was multiple choice. And you really had to think in a very rigid kind of way in order for you to get the right mark, in order for you to get the grade that you wanted. And I never went and spoke to my professors or teachers ever if I got what I thought was a bad grade or not as high a grade as I was expecting for myself, because I was scared of the judgment. I felt like I would be judged and nobody would want to talk to me, and they would think of me as inferior, and so on and so forth. In my second year, I finally got the courage and I went and spoke to a professor because I went and looked at my exam review. That was the other thing I never did in my first year, was I never went and looked at the exams afterwards to see, okay, what are the right answers? Where did I go wrong? So make sure you do that. But when I went to speak to my professor in my second year, I said to him, I don't really understand why I got some of these wrong, because this is what I was thinking. And you will not believe the professor said to me, yeah, your answer is right. So I was like, okay, then why is it wrong? Like, why did I not get the mark? And he's like, it's just, you know, we're not looking for any kind of, you're thinking about like lung pressure, like it's like a very complicated, but basically you're thinking about breathing in different circumstances. We just want you to think about if you're in a room, in a vacuum, in standard temperature, with absolutely no wind pressure at, you know, ground level. That's the answer that we wanted from you. So I was like, so I'm being penalized for thinking about realistically what would be happening to people, because nobody operates in this vacuum that this guy was talking about. So then I said to him, I'm like, so how do you get the right answer here? And he's like, sweetheart, which was condescending. Don't ever let anybody speak to you that way. But it was very sexist. But sweetheart, you just need to learn how to play the game. And I was like, so this is a game? And he's like, it's a game. And we don't really care about what you have to offer until you prove to us that you can play the game. And then you go into your higher education. And that's when we actually look at your individual creativity. So what I learned there is I had to figure out how to play the game. But I also didn't ever let go of my own creativity. And when I got into my fourth year, that's when I could actually write my own. I did my own research. I actually found a gene. That was pretty cool. And then people rewarded me for that creativity that I initially had to begin with, that got me interested in science to begin with. So do be aware, again, that's a huge inequity, that we have this system at play, and that people are in these positions of power and they know that there's these inequities that are there. It is a game a lot of the time. And you as a critical person, as a critical science person, are going to question and be aware and think about better ways that we could be doing science, and we could be teaching science, and we could be creating these scientific systems so that we could all actually benefit from the amazing wealth of knowledge that's available from those individual experiences. This is a really great video. Rupali, we end at 6, right? Exactly at 6?
If everyone wants to stay back, because I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat box as well. So if you're okay and everyone's okay, we could probably go an extra like 10 minutes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Because this is a really great video. Again, you can find it on YouTube. I'm not going to show you the whole thing. I'm just going to show you a quick clip, but I think he does a really good job of saying what it is that we're trying to say.
Relationships with their parents. I feel incredible. You see, I spent so much time watching the impact that my mother had on other children just by talking to them, that I realized that children are like hosts of endless potential once we take the time to interact and listen to them. Carl Sagan once said, every kid starts out as a natural-born scientist, and then we beat it out of them. And there are 2 important messages here. The first is that children are born with all the traits that make an excellent scientist. They question everything, they often experiment, they learn from those experiments, and they are virtually unbiased towards any particular result. Unfortunately, the second part still applies. And in my opinion, we are still not doing enough to foster our little scientists. Because looking back at my personal school journey, and also in schools that I visited during outreach activities, I saw that it's common for us to ask children to compartmentalize their creative, interrogative, and connective thinking in order for them to acquire and memorize scientific content. And although content knowledge is extremely important, it is now widely understood that it cannot be disengaged by other types of knowledge because it doesn't grant scientific literacy by itself. Children should acknowledge scientific work, not just because scientists or teachers or any other people say they should, but because it's constantly being passed through the process of critical thinking, of questioning. And it's really easy for us to make children forget that making questions, testing hypotheses, be wrong, and question again is how you create valid ideas. Like pediatrician Dr. Laura Jana once said, it should be more important to ask the right questions than to know the right answers. And children are natural inquisitors, so the sooner and the earliest we expose them to advanced scientific concepts and scientists, the more literate adults they will become. What psychology literature shows is that children as young as 4 years of age can moderately assess the trustworthiness of an individual when they are choosing in what to believe. Crazy, right? But this gets extremely pertinent if we now look on how children perceive scientists. And in the last few decades, few has changed in that perception. In recent studies, it is still shown that more than 50% of inquired children think of scientists as chemists, lab coats and goggles, mixing chemicals in a lab. And don't get me wrong, chemists are superheroes, but how will a child make a connection between climate change and a chemist? Or between someone that stays in the lab all day and a marine biologist studying plastic pollution in the sea? If we are not constantly exposing kids to different scientists and actively exercising their questioning skills, how will they understand what the job of a scientist truly is about? So curiously enough, in the discussion in one of these studies, the proposed solutions for this were better depiction and representation of scientists in the global media, which makes sense, and the clear portrayal of scientific work done by teachers and parents to their children. There was no consideration whatsoever that scientists themselves should actively change this. But I know what you are all thinking now. I mean, but scientists are so busy mixing chemicals together.
We're going to pause there. So notice that he talks about the idea that, a lot of the time the creativity, the creative process is taken out of the depiction of what a scientist is. And that's a huge problem. And a lot of the time in certain communities, depending on what community or what values there are, if you're interested in doing things like joining the drama club or picking up an instrument, these things are not validated the way that science and math are validated, because it's seen as this very stringent, very compartmentalized way of learning. Whereas when you have both parts of your brain active, you can mend them together, and that's where you come up with your really creative processes. And that's where science comes from. It's through experimentation, it's through getting things wrong, it's through thinking differently, thinking outside the box than other people would have. And that's where those new ideas come from. So just some tips for you to pass before we go into Q&A. Follow your interests and your curiosity. If you want to go out and you want to go for a nature walk, there are amazing things that you can look at. So I go with my kids sometimes. We just had a giant wasp hive that we discovered on the side of our house that we didn't notice until recently. And you can, once we killed the wasps, I don't feel bad for them, but anyway, but once we killed the wasps, it was a safety thing. We opened up the nest and we took a look at what the nest was and what it looked like. And then we went onto YouTube and we were like, what, how do they even make that? What are those white things that are coming out of there? Oh, they're larvae. Okay. You can make anything a science experiment. I know they sell a lot of kits and stuff that you can buy for science kits. You can just do that in your kitchen. If you just type in everyday kitchen science into YouTube, into Google, there's tons of different websites that will come up that you can just mix together and you can observe and you can make your own science experiments. We got a microscope recently for my 7-year-old, and we went out and we got pond water and we just looked at the pond water. We used to do that in school. I used to take my students out and we kind of did that. There's lots of things that you can just explore on your own. A lot of the time, if there's parents or caregivers that are out there that are listening, questioning is not a bad thing. Sometimes you have a child who questions a lot of things, and a lot of the time we don't like it because we're just like, just do what I'm telling you to do because I'm telling you to do it right now. But really, that curiosity, you can foster that. You can that's critical thinking. That's critical questioning if it's done in a constructive way. And so you can foster that. My students used to ask me questions to answers of things that were going on in class, and I would ask them other questions. I would never give them the answers. And they were like, Miss, why do you do that to us? Just give us the answer. And I'm like, no, because that's my brain working. That's not your brain working. We got to get your brain working. So I would always ask other questions. So if they would ask me a question, I'd ask them, what are they thinking about this? Or have they thought about this? And what does that mean? And they'd be like, what does it mean, Miss? And I'm like, I don't know. Go and find the answer. I mean, you guys are living in an era now where you can type in anything and you'll get answers to them. So this is a really great way to develop your critical questioning skills. Grow a garden. We're not connected anymore. He talks about the idea that, we're not connected to seeing science in progress. I had a class once where we were talking about food chains, and my students were telling me that if there was a tiger here, they were saying they were at the top of the food chain. And I said, so if there's a tiger in front of you, who do you think is going to win that battle? And they were like, tigers are not going to eat you. Tigers are your friends. And I'm like, what? Have we Disneyed you guys to the hilt that you don't even see that if you were out there? And then I had a young man who had just come from India, and he was like, hey, tiger will eat you, right? So I just love that he was like very real. He's like, no, guys, like, let's get with the program. Tigers will eat you. So we're so disconnected to where our food comes from. What is food science? Why are you told to eat certain things in certain ways? Why are certain foods grown in certain ways? If you are a meat eater, what impact is the meat having on the environment that's around you? How can you engage in sustainable eating? These are things that we don't think about, and we need these answers from scientists. So you can start being a scientist from now, whatever age you are, by just asking these kinds of critical questions, following your curiosities, and don't doubt yourself. That's the biggest thing. Anybody can be a scientist, and you just need to believe in yourself, and you can be a scientist. So I will end it there.
Thank you, Sayema. That was so engaging. There are so many questions in the chat box, some of which you have already answered, but I am going to take some time to ask you the question. Sure. You're okay with it?
Yeah.
Also, just for everyone's knowledge, we do still have a poll for today. So please stick around until the end of the poll so that we can get some feedback as well. So one of the questions you were already asked was your mother's name.
Oh, did more people ask about that as well?
People want to know. They want to look up your mom.
Her name is Nuri. Oops, Nuri Chowdhury. Chowdhury. There she is. Now she's going to be like, I cannot believe that you had told everybody about. I don't know that all of these are her, but anything related to University Health Network. Oh yeah, see Richmond Hill. Yeah, there. This is her. She's showing up. So you can take a look at that at your own time.
I'm going to look her up too.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm very like, considering I'm also a scientist, and I'm just like, yes, I need to know more. I need to learn more.
Well, and that's the other thing, you know what, I forgot to mention it to your viewers, also your network. When we talk about inequities, this is the thing. If you have a network that you can connect to, that's one of my tips. So Rupali, this is amazing that Rupali is offering you this opportunity to get to know people, to connect with people who are scientists, who are in the field. Because my mom, when I was in university, she was able to tell me when all the University Health Network offers research summer positions for students that are in university. And my mom would look out for me and tell me, oh, the postings have gone up. And so I would know right away when the postings went up. And so I would apply right away. So every summer I had a job. And she wasn't pulling connections for me. It's just that she would tell me that the jobs are up, whereas a lot of us didn't know when the job postings would go up for those summer research positions. So build your network with people who are in the field, because even things like that, like knowing when the job postings go up, that can give you an advantage, and you can get those positions and get those hands-on experiences.
And one of the advice our keynote gave yesterday was, don't be afraid to go up and talk to people you think are intimidating. Like, just go up and talk to them, and that's how you make those connections.
Absolutely.
There was another question here, and you touched on it a little bit, but if you could elaborate on what role can parents play to promote equity and break the stereotypes in everyday lifestyle?
So that's a really great question. It's one that I think all of us who are in parenting grapple with. I think just being critically aware. I think that when you catch yourself saying a certain thing, just know that you catch yourself before it comes out. And also question, if you are asking your children to do things in a certain way, why are you asking that? So like, for example, today I was trying to engage I have two sons, one is 3, one is 7. And we were doing melon balling, like we cut open a watermelon and we were making balls with the watermelon balls. And my older one, he was trying to do it quickly because he saw me doing it quickly, and then the watermelon went flying everywhere. And so initially I got upset, because that's our initial, I'm like, oh gosh, you're making such a mess. And he got upset. And then I thought to myself, see, that in itself was killing his curiosity. That's a physics experiment that he's doing right there, that the force of my hand is causing the projectile to have, the equal reaction on the opposite side. And I just squashed that for him because I associated with something negative. When he asks questions, it can be frustrating. He asks lots of questions, like, and I try to tap into that, because as my teacher side kicks in, I try to foster, okay, he's asking questions. What is he thinking? And I ask him, what are you thinking? Like, what is the concept of context of what it is that you're thinking? One day he wore like a little beret to school, like a little clip in his hair to school. And he was in kindergarten actually at the time. And I said, we were fine for him to wear it. But as my partner was dropping him off at school, he just said to him, what do you think the kids are going to say when you wear that beret to school? And he's like, well, some of them might say that's for girls. You're not supposed to wear it. And he's like, okay, so what are you going to say? And he's like, I'm going to say, you know what? I like it. And I'm me, and it's my body. And so I can wear whatever I want. And, that day, my partner said to me, I think we've done a good job. I think we're on the right track. We've empowered him. And so really fostering that sense of individuality and not giving into those stereotypes. Like, I'm not going to lie, when I see him like putting the pink beret in his hair, part of me is like, oh gosh, should I say something? Because society is not accepting of that. But that's an inequity that we've created in society. If you go back 50 years, in Europe, young males wore pink. It was the opposite of what the gender roles that we assign to them now. So, I think just being aware of it and critically challenging it, and asking yourself, if I'm seeing my daughter sitting around and playing video games, am I going to say to her, maybe stop? Why am I telling her to stop playing video games? Because, by the way, there's really good scientific games and math games that you can play. That's an aside. But how long have they been on their device? Certainly you don't want them to be on forever. So are we saying to them, get up and go outside and explore outside? Or are we saying to them, get up and clean? And if we are saying get up and help to clean the house, are we saying that equally to our male gendered children as well in the house? So just being aware of maybe examining ourselves and how we were raised and the different messages that we received, and then being more critically aware when we're interacting with our children and flipping the dialogue in our minds before it comes out of our mouths. And if we have said, address that as well. So I had to apologize to my son today and say, you know what, you're upset, and this was totally my fault. Like, we were doing something cool and I messed it up. And while I don't appreciate the mess, so now it's okay to make mistakes, and now. And then I actually said to him, because I knew I was coming into Lotus Stem, so Lotus Stem was on my mind. I said to him, when people do experiments, Dean, like how many errors do you think they make? Do you think they do get it right away, or do you think they get it wrong right away? And he's like, oh no, they would do it wrong all the time. And I'm like, right. So that's being a scientist. So it's okay that you exerted your hand on this watermelon balling over here and got it wrong, because now, you can learn from that. So just having that kind of honest dialogue with your children, I think, very important.
That's a great message. I think that's something that all of us, not just with our own children, but also when we're interacting with our nephews, our nieces, maybe even in our classrooms. That's something that I try to bring in when I'm teaching at the university level as well. It's not just about just know the theory. Make the mistakes, learn from it, and let's keep that open dialogue going. There's a question here that's asking, is gender stereotypes normalized?
In science or in general? I would say yes. The simple answer, absolutely, gender stereotypes are completely 100% normalized. And we need to really question. So if you have gender stereotypes, like when you're watching, there was a show on Netflix and I can't remember what it was. And I started watching it and I couldn't get past the first episode. And I actually wrote to Netflix and I told them how disgusted I was. All the characters were white. There was only one young man who was a Black character, and he was the basketball player on the team. And he was the guy he was a basketball player, and he was also kind of like the bad guy on the show. And I'm talking, this is like 20 minutes into watching this Netflix show, and right away my alarm bells went off. And I actually wrote Netflix a letter and I challenged it. And I said, really? Like, are you kidding me? This is like 4 years back. So it's not even like now we have a little bit more awareness because of societal events, I think. But this was before, when people weren't really talking about this. And people who are living in those circumstances where they see those gender inequities, they see those racial inequities, they're aware because they're living in it constantly. But a lot of the time, those of us who are in dominant positions don't necessarily see them. So it is really important that stereotypes, gender roles 100% are stereotyped and put out there, especially if you have this depiction. I think inadvertently we may discourage some of our females, gendered female young ones from going into science, because if we have this idea that it's all consuming, your whole life is going to become like this, you can't have a balance, you can't have a family, that can be, those stereotypes can be put on and can be off-putting to children. So you might even be telling your young females that are around you things like, we want you to work hard, we want you to go into science field, but at the same time, if you're telling them, your role is to take care of your family, that is your primary role, you have to be a good partner, you have to be a good mother, you have to be all these things, that can actually create conflict within the mind of a young female herself. So it's really important that we address that these are things that are inequities that are out there, these are dominant narratives that are out there, so that we can create critical children who can understand that, yes, these are some things that are out there, these are what my wants are, but I can find balance and I can do both.
That's so true. It's a little bit of my personal narrative there is that I was fed that the thought process of you need to study, you need to do well, but at the same time, you need to learn how to take care of a household and cook and clean, and your role, like marriage is going to be a big part of your life. So being a scientist may not necessarily fit that narrative. My parents were very supportive when I did choose to go down the scientist route, but it did come with its own internal battle where I had to question now, oh, okay, can I have other interests other than just being a scientist? And now I do a lot of DIYs. I like to pick up different skills, and I do art, I do dance, I like to, I'm currently learning how to grow different things from seeds. So nice. I saw someone wrote in the chat box that they were going back to grade 4 biology, and I'm going back to grade 4 biology and just relearning how to grow different things too, and so keeping that curiosity going. I am very cognizant of the time. There are a few more questions, but the question that I will end with is, we have some of our young participants who are wondering if they can get in touch with you after through email.
Yes, they can. I will, are you sharing the slide decks, Rupali?
I can share the slide decks with everyone, and I can share your contact with everyone as well.
Great. So what I can do is, in the slide deck, I can put the preferred email that people can definitely contact me at.
Sure. So we will have that. Thank you so much, Sayema. Before everyone leaves, I'm just going to pull up the poll here. If everyone can take some time to respond back. But Sayema, honestly, thank you so much. This was a really, really engaging workshop. And I feel like everyone was holding on to every word that you were saying, because there was a lot of discussion happening in the chat box.
That's great.
A lot of conversation about ways that you made people think and question their own thinking styles. I did put in the YouTube videos that you showed. I put in the titles in the chat box. So hopefully everyone got a chance to grab those, because there was a lot of interest in listening to those as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I think this is a phenomenal, I wish I had something like this when I was younger. So thank you for creating this opportunity for everybody out there. Thank you.
No, thank you. It's, I mean, it was created because I myself was like, I wish I had this. So for everyone who's here, if you have responded to the poll, thank you so much. And we will have day 4 tomorrow of Degrees of Success. We are going to have Canadian Association of Girls in Science coming in to do our outreach. And we'll be doing a little bit of work on how to be a scientist. So it fits perfectly in with the message that Sayema left us with, that anyone can be a scientist. And then after that, we will have a career panel with some of our Lotus STEM members. And where do our Lotus STEM team, what is our full-time job? And you'll get to hear about that. And we'll talk a little bit more about our own identities and how that has helped us in making decisions with our careers. So I hope to see everyone tomorrow. The live stream link for this will also be sent out to everyone. And I will send out Sayema's email that she would be open to being reached at. I will send that out as well into your email addresses. So everyone will have that or contact. Thank you so much for coming today, and I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.
Thank you.